Third cab off the rank. Guess that's another bronze medal for the collection. Thanks, Dave. So my name's Chris. I'm here to talk to you tonight as an evolutionary biologist and a zoologist. And before anyone asks, no, I don't fucking work at the zoo. No, I don't work with David Attenborough. And no, of course I don't have a freezer full of dead animals. Usually when I say evolutionary biology, people say, you work with old fossils. Picked the wrong crowd for that one. When I talk about evolution, what I'm talking about is the change in how frequently certain traits appear in populations over generations. And the populations I'm interested in are ones we use for rewilding. This is a bit like Jurassic Park, but instead of taking DNA from dead mosquitoes, using it to resurrect dinosaurs and make a movie franchise that was 5 instalments too long, we take individuals from populations that are threatened with extinction and we breed them in captivity while they're still around to be saved. And instead of releasing them onto an island owned by a rich eccentric millionaire who looks suspiciously like David Attenborough's brother, we release these individuals back into their native habitat once the threats to their survival have been removed. These captive environments are controlled, they're safe, and every need of the captive bred individuals is catered for. That means individuals that don't have the optimal traits to thrive in the wild can thrive in captivity. They reproduce, they pass on their genes, and eventually the non-wild traits become more common in the population. But release these individuals back into a wild environment that they're not adapted to, and they might not thrive or survive, and we might lose the native species that we've fought so hard to protect. Rewilding is something we actually do quite a lot of in Australia, with the Tassie devil, with the quoll, with the rock wallaby. But I'm going to talk to you about insects because I'm a weirdo and I think insects are cool. And in particular, I'm going to talk to you about a very special, critically endangered Aussie species. And to paraphrase Coco Chanel, you can't go wrong with a little black stick insect. Now I know what you're thinking. A stick insect should look like a stick, right? Instead, this gal looks more like a small black lobster that forgot to grow claws and confused the sea with a tree. I'm not surprised they're endangered. These insects start out life as these tiny little green things, pushing their way out of an egg into the big wide world. They spend a few months chilling out, eating some green leaves, practicing their Superman pose. And then they emerge as these glossy black adults. Just look at the gloss on them. Look at the shine. Look at those quads. I don't know what leg workout that is, but I want in. And very unusually for an insect, these guys often pair for life. Just check out these two having a cuddle. Aww. So while sometimes described as the land lobster, the species is far better known as the Lord Howe Island stick insect. That's a bit of a mouthful. Let's call him Howie. So for nearly a century, it was thought Howie was extinct after we accidentally introduced rats onto Lord Howe Island in the 1920s in a shipwreck. This is a small island off the coast of New South Wales. Nearly a century on, 30-ish stick insects were discovered on a rocky outcrop off the island called Ball's Pyramid. So some breeding pairs were brought back to mainland Australia, and at the end of 2018, the captive population at Melbourne Zoo had been bred for 14 generations. That's 14 generations all born in the same set of glass houses. We know Melbourne's taken a family home to extreme levels, but really. And getting back to those traits to thrive and survive in the wild, the traits I'm really interested in are sensory organs, the structures we use to decode the world around us through vision, smell, sound, touch, taste. And I got thinking about Howie's sensory organs. By keeping these things in captivity in glass houses for generation upon generation, Could we be changing their senses for the worse? Think of the world as a bit like a Where's Wally. There's a lot of distracting shit you have to sift through. And then you finally see that red and white beanie and wonder what the fuck just happened to the last 2 hours of your life. And for those of you who aren't listening to my hilarious jokes because you're still trying to find where Wally is, he's there. So in the wild, animals have to sift through a lot of background noise, distracting shit, to get to the information that they need to survive. They need to be able to find the information that lets them identify food plants from non-food plants. They need to be able to detect an approaching predator so they can hide. The males need to be able to locate a mate. In contrast, these captive environments are like the Hilton for stick insects. And if anyone's staying at the Hilton, I really hope for your sake that they have less insects. So, in captivity, the only food plants around are Howie's favourite species to eat. There's not a predator to be found, don't need to detect those anymore. And the females can only be at most tens of metres away, so the males can just sit back and wait for the ladies to stroll on by. So getting back to our Where's Wally, this situation is like the only guy on the page is Wally. No distractions. And for those of you who aren't listening to my jokes because you're still distracted trying to find Wally on this page. So in captivity, the stick insects with less sensitive sensory organs should actually be at a competitive advantage. They've got more energy to invest in traits that contribute more to their survival, like reproductive output. So to see if this was actually going on, I went to some museums and I got some preserved specimens from the historic population that existed on Lord Howe Island. And I went to Melbourne Zoo and asked for some dead individuals from their captive population. So yes, I really do have a freezer full of dead animals. Maybe I have two. When the stick insects at the zoo knew there was a scientist waiting for them to die naturally to look at their sensory organs, I think they went on a health kick just to shit me. There were 400 of them and I had to wait for 6 months just to get 20. Glad they're living a long time, but you're on my time now. So since insects mainly rely on smell to locate food plants and mates, I decided to look at their scent organs, the antennae. So if you've ever looked up close at an insect antenna, it's covered in literally thousands of tiny little sensory hairs called sensilla. And they detect all sorts of different stimuli, from smell through to sound, vibrations, tastes, and even stretch. And these things are less than just a few thousandths of a millimetre long. They're tiny. See, scientists think it's really interesting when insects smell with tiny little hairs. Yet just one tiny little hair appears in my nose, and suddenly my partner's got the trimmers out. So because these things are so small, I had to use a scanning electron microscope to look at the antennae. Unlike a microscope most people used at high school, which uses light to form an image, these microscopes use an electron beam to form an image. But antennae don't naturally conduct electrons, think of it a bit like electricity. So I had to coat them in metal so I could see the fine details on the surface. And this meant that I got to do something I've always wanted to do ever since I saw Goldfinger. Not paint someone to death, I'm a scientist, not a psychopath. Okay. I got to coat insect antennae in pure gold. It was great. Not only did that gold coating let me see the fine details on the surface, but it protected the antennae from damage by the microscope, and when the experiment was over, it made them way more valuable on the black market. And just as I predicted, unfortunately, compared to individuals from the historic wild population on Lord Howe Island, the antennae of insects bred in captivity have far fewer of the little sensilla that detect odours, so their sense of smell is greatly reduced. Rats have now been eradicated from Lord Howe Island. It's the first time in history a community has actually chosen an insect over a mammal. The plan in coming years is to release the captive bred individuals onto the island. and re-establish that wild population. But those insects with less sensitive antennae may struggle to efficiently locate high-quality food or locate a mate. Might be too late to hide by the time they detect a predator or an approaching documentary presenter that wants to manhandle them. I actually love David Attenborough, by the way. It's hard to believe. So the population would survive, but it might not thrive as well as it could. So tonight I hope I've got you thinking. Captive breeding is essential to protect and build populations for rewilding our threatened species before they go the way of the dinosaurs and we have to resort to something that lands with Jurassic Park 7. But breeding animals in an unnaturalistic... That looks way scarier than I thought, I'm so sorry. But breeding animals in an unnaturalistic environment can change them in ways that they mean they don't have the traits they need to thrive in the wild. So we need to be thinking about more naturalistic captive environments, like enclosed predator-free nature reserves, so that we don't change these captive bred animals for the worse. And I hope I've also convinced you that a big, black, glossy stick insect with quads to die for is actually a pretty cool guy. And may they be around for generations to come, featuring in David Attenborough documentaries and having their mortal remains gold-coated by biologists. Thank you very much. Have a great night.